I'm David Young, and I would like to welcome you to the very first episode of my new podcast, Advantage. In each episode, we'll talk shop about a variety of topics that include education, leadership, business, entrepreneurship, and many others. Now, I'm an educator at heart, so no matter what topic we explore, there's a good chance that we're going to eventually get around to talking about connections to education. Today's topic is centered on both education and educational leadership. We're going to explore the phrase, what's best for kids, or doing what's best for kids. Now, you can talk to any educator and mention the phrase, what's best for kids, and they're going to immediately nod in agreement. If you ask them about it, they will wholeheartedly agree that what's best for kids is a mantra that drives them. In every decision, every situation, we as educators are tasked with doing what's best for the kids. It simply encompasses the heart of those called to work in education. But is it really that easy? We certainly want to do it, or at least we want to do it. But if we're being really honest with ourselves, do we always want to, like really in every situation? And because of this, do we actually carry through with this as the key mindset that drives the way we operate? School and district leaders are tasked with not only living by this mantra, but ensuring that those who work for them do the same. It's a tough task. It's a complex idea, but it is one that we take very seriously. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Amanda Ellis. Dr. Ellis is the Vice President in charge of K through 12 policies and programs at the Kentucky Council for Postsecondary Education. She has a celebrated career in education, holding many important posts. But back in the beginning, she was the principal of my school when I was a teacher. We've known each other for a long time and have worked with each other in many different roles throughout our careers. Dr. Ellis is one of the best administrators with whom I've ever worked, and one of the best examples I've known when it comes to doing what's best for kids in every situation. So sit back and enjoy as we explore what it means to be an educational leader who does what's best for the kids. So, Dr. Amanda Ellis, I want to welcome you to our first podcast. Thank you so much for being willing to join us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So as I mentioned, we go way back, and so I know a lot about your history, and our families know each other. But for our listeners, do you mind to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and whatever you'd like to share?
Absolutely. David, it's a pleasure to be here, and you are hitting on my why. It's exactly what you said, like every other educator. This is my 25th year in education, which seems impossible. But I started as a middle school teacher and thought for sure I would be an elementary teacher for life. And then I went into being a curriculum coach at the elementary level, and then went on to be an elementary principal, which has honestly been the highlight of my career. Hardest days of my life, but the most rewarding. And from there, I decided that it was time to expand again to focus on more kids, and that's in our Commonwealth. And I became the Associate Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner of Teaching and Learning at the Department of Education. And then during COVID, decided to expand yet again to connect dots for students, and eventually became the Vice President of K-12 policies and programs. And so I've really been from your early primary all the way to the point of transition to post-secondary. So my career has taken me many places that I would say, literally, that I said I would never, ever do, or would even be considered qualified to do. So it's been a true blessing on this journey, and have several years to go.
Well, it's very good. And of course, I'll add in that I mentioned that we first knew each other when you were my principal, but we actually knew each other a little bit before that. We were in the same district, and you were a curriculum resource or an instructional coach.
That's right.
With my wife, Holly. And you guys got to know each other well through that. And so anyway, before we get into what's best for kids, you went from being a teacher like I did to being an administrator, or a coach, and then an administrator, and then eventually went on into some policy work and some broader brushstroke type work. What made you want to continue to grow in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I knew when I received my principal certification, my administrator certification, I was very interested in beyond the four walls of my school, looking at the different systems and the different ways to serve students and families. And so I knew I had to get into a coaching role to really appreciate what was going on in the elementary schools, because I had been in middle school science for 6 years. And so in order to be able to lead folks, you got to be where they are and know what they do and appreciate that. And so I needed to really engage and immerse myself back in elementary, get reacquainted, and really familiarize myself with the culture and the environment, especially in our district at that point. And when I did that for a couple of years, I fell in love with it. And it was about the instructional leadership that I realized I loved most, the learning, and really identifying ways that we as a staff could improve, continuously improve to best meet the needs of students. And so when I had the opportunity, David, to apply for a principal's job, I thought I was years and years down the road to even becoming eligible to be considered, because of so many good people like you, that I got to work with indirectly and directly. And so when I landed the job at our elementary school at Emma B. Ward Elementary, it was a shock to the system, because our worlds became very complex. And I know your world did shortly after that too, when you took on your first principal job, of things you just don't know that you thought you knew. And so my perspective broadened yet again on the needs and the complexities of our schools. And so when I did that for nearly 9 years, I knew, because my children were elementary age at that time. My husband's a teacher. So there were some long, hard days, and I earned my doctorate degree during that time, as well. And so some long, long days, and I knew that it was time before my children got into those formative middle school, high school years, that I needed to focus more on my family and be available more in the after hours. And so if I don't do 110%, I'm not going to do the job I'm doing. I need to pass it on for someone else to do. And so one of my former colleagues told me I should check out education policy at the department. And I told her at that time she was crazy, that I would never do that. I would never fit in. And really what I did when I went to the department is I brought to the table the reality checks of what people do every day, to folks who've never been in education. And I don't mean that so much at the department. There's some incredible, passionate people who do hard work that nobody knows. But when we had to share that and communicate that, a lot of people don't know what they don't know just because they've been students they haven't taught or led in a building. And so that paid great dividends for me to learn about the political aspect of it, and just policy development and impacts on our school and from our national and federal perspective. So it was a huge learning experience for me. It was incredible the way I got to represent Kentucky many times. And so it's just really expanding the work I do. But honestly, the journey I've been on was not in the plan, but it has just continued to enrich my profession and my perspective.
Well, I know certainly on a personal level, and then from a distance, I've been able to see the impact that you have had on a
Thank you.
school full of kids, and then on a state of students, and then beyond that. So
Thank
really
you.
appreciate that. So over that time, similar to me, and I guess I should say a little bit about my background as well. Was an elementary teacher, became an elementary principal. From an elementary principal to a chief academic officer and assistant superintendent in a school district for 10 years, and then on to be the chief executive officer of the Central Kentucky Educational Cooperative in Central Kentucky. And if you're listening to this from outside Kentucky, that is what a cooperative in Kentucky is what many states call an educational service agency, an ESA or something along those lines. So have been in that role for a few years now. And so along the road, I have gotten to work with lots of teachers and lots of leaders in education, whether that's at the school level or the district level. And I know you've gotten to work with a lot of those folks along the way too. And when I'm able to work with those aspiring leaders or current leaders, we always take the time, or I try to take the time to talk about that phrase that we're going to discuss today, what's best for kids. Because I believe in education, it's a phrase that we use often, and it certainly describes sort of the calling that we have in our
Right.
jobs, is to really be driven by the best interest of students, of children, in every decision that we make. But when I say what's best for kids, what's it make? What are your first thoughts?
Yeah, so it's a great question, David, and I think your intro was so true. I think even when we were probably in our education prep program, and we used to have the cliche, "All kids can learn." Of course they can, right?
Sure.
Just like we want what's best for kids. Enacting that is difficult sometimes, but my goal, my why has always been about, even if it's hard, if it's best for the students, that's what we do, because that's who we serve.
Yeah.
And they're counting on us. When students enter the building, they never question if we are able to do what's best for them. They have the intent or the thought, most of the time, unless given a reason otherwise, is to think that everything that we do, the decisions we make, even how we challenge them, it's
Mhm.
because we're trying to do what's best for them. That's even with expectations and how we set our school culture and the environment that we develop. Does it exhibit the impression or the feeling or the actions that we are putting our kids first
Mhm.
in the decisions that we make? So that's what comes to mind, is that, are we questioning ourselves when we make these big decisions? And if we don't know what is best, are we seeking from others and experts and evidence-based practices and colleagues to figure out what is best when we don't know, or we're not fully aware of their backgrounds or maybe the challenges that we face?
Yeah,
So,
I think that's a great point. It is, it's a mindset,
mhm,
as much as it is
that's
a
right.
decision that I'm going to make now and then I'm going to make another one later. It's more about how I operate,
That's
and
right.
and it's a great point also that the kids, they come to school just taking that for not taking it for granted, but they come to school expecting that.
That's right.
They have no reason to think that we aren't making every decision based on, their needs.
That's right.
And but at the same time, we know in school leadership,
Mhm.
sometimes, and this gets to the heart of the topic, sometimes that's a tricky thing.
Very.
And I'll point out the first reason that I think it's tricky is that, our staff, the adults, they're important too,
Absolutely.
and we need to care for them and
Mhm.
care about their families and their workload. And teaching is a calling, but it is a tough job.
That's right.
Certainly uh, from a physical standpoint, from an
That's
emotional
right.
standpoint, from really every standpoint that you can look at it.
Absolutely.
And most of the time, what's best for kids and what's best for everybody else lines up pretty well,
Mhm.
but not always.
That's right.
And so, what are your thoughts about kind of threading that needle
Mhm.
between what's best for kids and then what's best for everybody else that's involved?
It's a great question, and my staff were my family, and we didn't always agree, but we were a family, and I don't say that as a kumbaya, but as a support. And so, David, in order, in my experience and my belief, is that if we're going to do what's best for kids, we have to discuss what that means.
Yep.
And what does that mean? Or what does that mean for the individual? What is that? Is that changing up your schedule? Does that mean that you're not going to have a common plan with someone that you've planned with for 10 years? Does that mean you're going to have to try a new concept or a new resource that you don't feel comfortable with? And so, what we can't do is give the command of doing what's best for kids without providing support to the staff. And so, what I learned the hard way is, if you don't, you have staff that are really overwhelmed because they're working as hard as they can, doing the best that they can do. I can't tell you I ever had a teacher walk in and say, "I'm going to harm kids today. I'm just not going to do what's best for them." I just never experienced that. In all
Right.
the schools I've worked in rural, I've worked in urban, and I've worked in suburban. And in all of my experiences with all the many different cultures and backgrounds, I never once experienced an educator that says, I'm going to harm someone today.
Sure.
Instead, they're like, I've really been thinking about this last night, how to help this student or address this issue. And so to me, that is where you as a leader have to remove barriers or provide supports to create a collaborative, supportive culture for your staff to do what's best for kids.
Yeah.
You can't have a hostile environment or all these demands of all the things you want them to do and say, and what I also want you to do is sacrifice all your planning time and all these other things to do this because it is best for kids. And I think part of my role as a leader, what I would tell them is I'm not the expert in exactly what that is. You are the expert, and I come to you and let's discuss this. But what my job is to do is to navigate so you don't get stuck with a bump in the road. That I remove that. And sometimes, David, that is given permission not to change your bulletin board.
Yep.
Sometimes that's given permission not to hang 26 new graded papers out in the hallway. Sometimes that means you don't change the calendar that day. And that sounds little and silly, but it's not, because teachers carry a huge responsibility on their shoulders to maintain all the things.
Yep.
And so what I wanted them to do is I needed them to focus on students. And if I was causing the barrier, I had to reflect myself and say, I'm not asking them to use the time to identify what's best for kids because I'm asking them to do these other things.
Mm-hmm.
It could even be a meeting that really could have been an email. And where I would thrive seeing my people together, doing a fun activity, coming together and just kind of refocusing, resetting, really was taking away time from what I had already asked them to do, which was rethink how we can best meet these needs, because meeting the needs of students changes every day. It changes by season, right? And so because of that, as a leader, I had to be nimble. And I had to go, y'all, we're going to cancel this meeting today because you haven't had time to breathe or think about how we can address these issues. So it is so easy to say. It sounds very stagnant, like you do it once and it's always good, but it's ever changing. And so really, and did we still have disagreements and weariness? And you're wearing me out, Ellis? Absolutely. And we had those long conversations about what to do different, but it was never to the point where it would sacrifice the needs of the child. And that's how we put it. So.
Well, and you touched a little bit early in your answer about the the lines of communication
Yes.
being open, and I love that you talked about being reflective, because
Yes.
we sometimes, as the leader, can be putting up barriers to our teachers being
That's
able to
right.
spend all of their time focused on kids. And of course, we're talking mostly about principals. We can do that as central office administrators
Absolutely.
as
And
well,
should.
and should.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think too, on the lines of communication and the fact that we've talked about this being a mindset. I think you
Yes.
want to create the culture in your school
Mm-hmm.
so that we are all kind of bouncing ideas off of each other,
That's right.
so that when a particular decision needs to be made, we're saying to ourselves, help me think through this.
That's right.
I know what I want to do, but let's think about, if we do that, who
Mm-hmm.
does that benefit the most?
That's right.
And
And a lot of that comes from trust,
yep,
to say you don't know, right? Or to say, how do we do this? And we're all human. And some days we don't want to think about it anymore. Sometimes we're just really tired or we're worn out from that situation. And part of that is coming in and providing a little respite for your colleagues.
yep,
And to say, you're struggling with this. I'm struggling with it too. Let's talk this out, or let's rethink this, or let's find someone who's doing it well. And that was part of my job too, is not to brag on, this teacher's really figured out this, because that's their environment, right? Like, it
sure,
works in their class environment, may not work in someone else's, but to definitely say, hey, this person's really done so well with this, this issue, whatever it may be, or this new approach. Why don't you reach out to them and talk, and giving them time to even talk colleague to colleague, that I'm not in the middle of that, was always beneficial, because then that always came back to the student. It always came back to what was best for them, without me saying, well, we can't do that because we can't do
mm-hmm,
that because, or they couldn't say that. It became very organic for them to talk through, because they're two professionals figuring out how to best meet the needs for those students or student. And so it's an ongoing process for sure.
So when we were talking earlier, you threw out a couple of just off the cuff examples. Teacher, we have to change your schedule.
Yeah, huge.
And in changing your schedule, it might be a benefit to you. It might help you, but it's for sure going to be a change. And
That's right.
and most of us struggle with change.
Yep.
It might change things so that you can't collaborate with another colleague through your planning, or if you're doing this at a district level, it may change up things for your principals or others, so that
That's right.
their time doesn't align as well, or they're out of their comfort zone. So can you let's brainstorm a little bit for anyone listening, because I think most of the time what's best for kids is pretty obvious. We come to a situation and all we have to ask ourselves is, well, what would be best for the kids in this situation, and then we can come up with that. But I think other times it's kind of hidden.
Agreed.
And I think the example of a teacher having to change her schedule is a good example of when it might be hidden. You might just, unless you stop and really think through that one, it might be hard to see how doing that is good for the kids, even though it's going to inconvenience me as the adult.
Right.
So can you think of any others off the top of your head that are those situations that we get in sometimes?
Yeah. So I think the instructional ones are the obvious ones.
Yep.
The district level ones that I think of that rocks everyone's world by 5 minutes is dismissal.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we talk about bus dismissal, right? And we talk about, this sounds silly, David, but it rocks people's world, right? It's like the Jello. If you shake one part of the Jello, all the Jello shaking. And that could be, we dismiss at 3:05 and we need people to stay till 3:30 for the final dismissal, because we have to make sure our kids are safe.
Yeah.
And so to talk through changing direction and times by 2 or 3 minutes in the cafeteria, all those things that change lunch times, how far you have to go because there's only a finite amount of time. Those are things that sound from the outsider looking in like not a big deal, right? You're like, it's 3:05 at 3:00. 5 minutes of change in someone's schedule, and not even always the adult, but even the students, is your rock your world experience. It changes your routine. It changes how you do things, how much time you have in between, and how your flow goes in your classroom, right? And even how you function at the end of the day to decompress a bit. Sometimes when it's your turn to go to the gym, to dismiss 200 students in about 15 minutes to car riders that all have different numbers is not good for you to decompress. And so, those are hard conversations sometimes. And I think that's why sometimes we have to step back and think about it. And even as a school leader, is to really think through, okay, then how do we keep what's best for students, and that stays, but how do we navigate a little bit on supervision? And nobody gets out of the supervision, but how do we change up that schedule? Maybe they rotate. Maybe somebody's a better morning person than an afternoon because they have 4 kids to drop off in the morning. So how do we work on that together? And that's where I really talk about being nimble. Like you can't just say this is how it is and just hope everybody gets over it, because to your point, David, that really rocks some worlds. And when it rocks the worlds of the adults, it's going to rock the world of the students, indirectly or directly. And so if we're going to keep our students our focus, the big thing is really about our why. Why are we changing this? And then what can we do to help each other out with this change? I'm sure you've seen, I wish I had the graphic with me because I'm a visual girl, but when we see change, adults change the slowest, right? We have those go-getters who are like, okay, let's do it. And we have those who are like, I'm not good with that. I need to watch for a while, make sure it doesn't crash and burn, and so you have everybody in your staff that are in different parts of that spectrum because they're human. We're all like that. And so really just talking through what is, one of the things we would do is talk through when we say what's best for students is, how would you want your child to be treated? How would you want your child to be kept safe in the afternoon? How would you want your child to be sent off out of the classroom at the end of a busy day? And what do you want to hear about when you get home?
Mhm.
And we want them to focus on, we want the students to focus on the things they learned that day, the things they did with their friends, the experiences they had, not that they felt tension and stress because of dismissal, because they don't care if it's 3 o'clock, 3:05, or 3:10. They're
Yeah.
just a little more tired. And so really put in perspective of your own family. But again, it's a process, when you change up, we changed lunch times and started at 10:35 to have smaller lunch groups. It was a rock your world experience, because that caused some teachers to eat lunch at 10:30 and then they didn't have a break again until 2 o'clock.
Yep.
And that sounds like, well, at least they have a break. No, like that's somebody in your face all day long without a breather. So you have to be cognizant of their um of their endurance, because you want your staff to be their very best, whether it's the custodian or the assistant or the counselor or the classroom teacher or the specials teacher. They've got to know what their role is. And every one of those folks in my building, I said, you're a teacher of something.
Yep.
And so if you're a teacher of something, what are you teaching them? That you don't have patience for them, or that you're really glad to see them and you know their name, or that you realize that they're having a bad day and every Thursday is a bad day for this student in the cafeteria. So you walk by and you talk to them. And so we made it very personal. David, I think you were gone before we did this, but when we were making changes, big changes culturally, one of the things that we did to kind of refocus on students is we walked through every name of students, every name in the school from
Wow.
first grade up for us through fifth grade. And they had to identify personally, not publicly, if they knew that child. And they had to know something more about that student than their academics.
Oh, I was
Could they
there.
say they like to play soccer, or they have 3 siblings, or they have 4
Mhm.
dogs, right? Like, have we gotten to know the individuals? And when there were fifth graders who had been with us, who had a few who knew, but not enough, then we started making efforts about getting to know the students individually, personally, as people. So when you make changes that feel uncomfortable and frustrating, especially in March, you get really frustrated. It's been a long winter.
Mhm.
It goes back to those individuals. And it's not just all the students, but it's John and Sarah and Juan and, Callie, and it's your individuals who all matter, right? And they're counting on us. And so when you really put in perspective of individuals and recognize the struggle of change with adults, you as the leader have to navigate that. And sometimes it's a hard conversation with support. And sometimes it's cheering them on, going, thank you for doing this, because look what you did for whoever, and so it's really important about personalization, which gets back to your point around culture.
So one thing that I'll say, I actually was at the school when we did that.
Okay, I couldn't
And
remember if you were there or not. Okay,
it
good.
was great. It was great. I have used that example so many times with leaders since then.
Yeah.
So I want to make one last connection. And
Yeah.
you kind of alluded to this. You said that we have been exploring ways that are very proactive,
Yep.
helping each other, supporting each other to have that mindset, thinking
Mm-hmm.
through different decisions collaboratively to determine the best path.
Mm-hmm.
You did a great job talking about bringing it down to the individual student level and how much easier it is to make student focused decisions when you know
Mm-hmm.
the students and can get down to each student's individual needs. So all of those are really proactive. As a leader, you do get yourself in situations sometimes
You do.
where what is really best for the children,
Mm-hmm.
you know, whoever that's going to affect, it's just not going well. Like it's
Yes.
not, that
Mm-hmm.
change is not a good thing. And so you mentioned, it's hard and you have to make those hard decisions. So
That's right.
um I believe that one of the most important qualities that great leaders have, just in general,
Mm-hmm.
is that they have to have courage.
That's right.
And a mentor or someone that I looked up to, John Roush, who was the president of Center College. I always use this quote, and I always want to give him credit for it because Dr. Roush talked about as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
The ironic thing is you have to use courage, but the ironic thing is the more often you use it exactly when you need to use it, the less often you have to use it.
So true.
And so when I have worked with young administrators, I often tell them that when I watch football games, I never played football, But when I watch football games, I notice that sometimes a player will get tackled and it just looks like it was so painful.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up on the bottom of the pile.
Yep.
And you think if I was on the bottom of that pile, they would have to drag me off to the side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when all the players finally roll off of his back, he just pops
Mm-hmm.
up and runs over to the huddle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I almost think that in their mind they have to convince themselves that they sort of somehow they have to sort of enjoy, being hit like that and being
Mm-hmm.
able to pop up and run back over to the huddle. I don't know how you would keep doing it over and over if you didn't.
That's right.
So
True.
I say to principals, we have to get that mindset a little bit.
That's right.
Like, when I get in a really difficult situation, if I'm going to have to might have to have a tough conversation or make a
Mm-hmm.
really hard decision where I know somebody on the other end is not going to be happy about it. If it's what's best for children, I have to be willing
You do it.
to, just like getting tackled and being at the bottom
That's
of the
right.
pile. I've got to be willing to
That's
grit
right.
my teeth and make that decision and
That's
then
right.
pop back up and run back over to the huddle.
That's right.
But somewhere deep down, you have to be able to get some pride from the fact that I'm doing
Absolutely.
that, and I know there are other people who probably wouldn't do that.
That's right. No, I
Uh,
think it's an excellent point, and you're right. And it gets back, David, to trust. And part of building trust within your staff is demonstrating that you have non-negotiables.
yeah.
And those non-negotiables is the buck stops with you. And as the leader, wherever you are at whatever level. And in my experience, I made it very clear my non-negotiables.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it in writing. I mean, we went through it, so it was never a question. And one of those is the students come first. And in the situation when I've had folks push back really hard, or just were resistant, depending on the situation, I would often remove that person from the situation because it was not the best situation. Or if they just lacked skills and were frustrated because they didn't know what to do, what was best, I would absolutely equip them with another person who could support, but I would be right there with them. I was very much present in my building, fully aware, and knew every kid. And some were difficult. It was hard to do what was best. But I never hesitated on having a conversation, a very direct conversation. Nobody ever wondered what I thought, but it was always private. It was always respectful. And my first thing is, how can we make this better? How can we make this work? Not assuming malicious intent, but identifying when it was not a healthy environment for the student, it was not working. Because if it's impacting one, it's impacting many. And so to your point, you absolutely have to have courage to have the conversation, because to ignore it is to not do what's best for kids.
Right.
And unfortunately that happens because it's a lot easier to ignore. But I also think the folks who are courageous to try new things highly respect and appreciate having a leader who will stand by the change that has to be made, or the adjustment, and it really honors what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're doing the right thing. And so, you always have a couple of staff who may be challenging, and we have hard conversations. And, if it is a newer placement and it's still not working and it is a detriment to our students or the environment, then you have very hard decisions to make. But as you said before, teaching's not for everybody. It's not for the faint at heart. It is a calling, but it is a service-oriented job that is demanding,
Mm-hmm.
and never stays in one place. You're constantly learning, you're constantly growing, because if you don't, you get left behind. And that's why you can't do it alone. And so although we always built a community of folks, of learners and professionals, sometimes when there wasn't a good fit, it wasn't a good fit. And you had to address it, whether that was in the immediate or long term, or providing additional support. We absolutely handled that, or I handled that, to
Mm-hmm.
really protect our culture and our environment of what was expected at our school. And because I wasn't willing to let that be jeopardized. And I wanted it for my own children. just like whenever they got there. They weren't there when I first got there, as you know,
Mhm.
but I wanted that. That's the environment I expected all of my children and all the kids to have a safe, positive, productive environment with adults who want to be there with them and who are willing to really demonstrate whatever it takes attitude.
And
And
that
so to your point, David, it was a part of the courageous conversations, and confronting what was inappropriate or confronting what was not helpful immediately in a respectful way, not a degrading way, that helped us to set our culture and our trust and build those relationships so then we could have honest conversations. And a lot of times it corrected itself even within the teams because we had champions for change in
sure.
every team in some sort. Didn't matter what team it was. And so to really empower them, to be able to come up with ideas, know that they had a voice in the school. But at the end of the day, the non-negotiable was we serve kids. And that's our business. That's what we do. And that's our priority. So
Really, really well said. It all starts with us.
it
Uh,
does.
but we do have leaders in classrooms, and we
Yep.
have others
Yes,
who can help carry out that mission and vision for making those decisions in the right way each time.
that's right. Takes all of us.
As we wrap up, any other things that are on your mind, or any advice or tips that you have for leaders on how to make sure they get this right?
Yeah, I think no matter what your role is, know your why. In every role I have served in, from classroom all the way through my role right now, my why are students at
Mhm.
any age, and really about intentional opportunities for students to grow and thrive and see themselves as worthy for a future. So, whether that was third graders or middle school students, high school or college, or even adults, have your why, know it, because if you don't know your why, it will be determined for you where you go. And so you don't want to ever give up on your values as an educational leader and those who have impact on those who are learning from you, whether it's formally in a classroom or watching you. And so that would be my words of wisdom, I guess, after 25 years.
Well, those are well said. And so with that, I want to thank you again
Thank you
for
for having me.
you're welcome. Thank you for being part of our very first podcast.
Yes.
And with that, that is going to wrap us up for today. Again, I want to thank Dr. Amanda Ellis from the Council for Postsecondary Education for joining us. And to our listeners, thanks for joining in today. And keep your eyes out for the next podcast coming soon.